As attacks on ICE agents are surging while they try to do their jobs in tracking down criminals, many commentators are blaming the media for demonizing these immigration agents.
There's one group, the Save America movement, that is raising hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to teach people how to stalk ICE agents. And we've seen that violence against ICE agents is up over 830%.
It doesn't matter to elected Democrats because they're trying to rebuild their credibility among their radical base. They want to turn up the rhetoric, which will only endanger ICE and also law-abiding Americans. So it's all Nazi imagery all the time.
Others are blaming the agents' conduct, such as CNN's Abby Phillip, reading from an AP report.
The man, who asked not to be identified for fear of reprisals, characterized the cells as zoo cages with 8 beds each, teeming with mosquitoes, crickets, and frogs. He says they're locked up 24 hours a day with no windows, no way to know the time.
There's 32 beds in a small area, that there's 3 toilets. Those are things that are easily verifiable. A lot of what's happening on immigration is performative cruelty as part of a strategy.
Ben, you can agree with ICE agents' tactics, you can not agree with ICE agents' tactics, but Donald Trump ran on mass deportation and he won the election.
He won the election, I think, in major part based on his immigration policies. And I think that if you look at the reaction that's happened to them, clearly half the country or more supports these policies. In fact, it routinely rates as being the most popular thing that he is doing in terms of you look at all the different policy standpoints that are looked at in polls. The other thing that I think is really important to understand here is that the American people are enormously in favor of deporting people who are here, who have committed criminal acts or who have criminal records. The question only becomes more vague or gray when you start talking about people who don't have additional criminal activity other than crossing the border illegally, which I should point out is still a criminal act.
Well, that actually is
a crime.
It's really a key point, because you can say, well, these are non-criminals, and everybody, I think, would agree, most of the country would agree, that people who have done crimes, what we think of as serious violent crimes, should be the priority. But if they broke the law in order to get here,
look, I think
aren't they still illegal?
They're still here illegally, but I think that this is still an area where there is a gray area. And one of the things that we've seen in the past, by the way, is that Republicans, even under President Obama, were overwhelmingly in favor of figuring out a path for the Dreamers to maintain their status here. They viewed them as being innocent victims, as most Americans do. But I think that the critical area here that the president has to navigate, and it's one that I think he's very aware of and has signaled in his recent rhetoric about this, is making clear that he does not want to get rid of the person who is, fixing your front yard or something like that.
Especially if they're working on a farm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in fact, that he wanted to target the worst of the worst, criminals, et cetera. The more that the White House and the administration leans into that, the more popular their policy will be, the more they are viewed as people who are going to be rounding up folks who are wearing, Old Navy shirts standing in front of a Home Depot, the less popular.
I've got half a minute. Would you go so far as to say the media are encouraging some of these attacks?
I think they are absolutely encouraging it, and I think that it is heinous. I think that the way that they have encouraged the targeting of these ICE agents who are working people, middle-class people, by the way, who function in these jobs, who serve the country, and who are just trying to enforce the law, it's absolutely abhorrent. I find it just, the least responsible thing you could possibly be doing. They are being tasked with something that they are trying to do. It's not a decision that they are making, and they're trying to do it to the best of their ability. They are not Nazis. They're not fascists. And to depict them as that, it's just heinous irresponsibility.
Right, and of course, Trump has called all kinds of things, including Nazis. Benjamin, thank you for coming by today. Next on Media Buzz, why the future owner of CBS is ending Stephen Colbert's Late Show.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Compagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.